Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got an interesting first impressions to do for you. Every now and then I start filming a video on a piece of gear and I end up kind of getting off into the weeds a little bit on a tangent, or if you haven't noticed, most of my videos are just me rambling. I don't have a structure or a specific cadence even of a way that I describe gear. Usually it's just kind of off the cuff and me just talking about it, and I feel like that keeps me more authentic, and hopefully people respond well to that. But it's also just my style and it's the way that I process things. So anyway, this is one of those rare occasions where I'm reshooting a video because I just accidentally got like 20 minutes deep into a video that should have been 10 minutes long about the knife, and instead it became more philosophical about where certain pieces of gear fit in certain areas. Anyway, this is a knife that was loaned to me for review by my buddy Matt, who is on Instagram as CuttingEdgeGear. I'm going to link to his Instagram down below. Super nice guy, incredibly knowledgeable, and he's been, I met him because he worked at a knife shop. He still works there part-time every now and then. He also now works at ProTech, and he's a student, and he's just a great guy who's hustling and who knows so much in the industry. And he's someone I go to when I have questions about a lot of things. So I appreciate that not only has he become a friend who I can talk to and borrow things from even, pardon me, but also I just appreciate who he is in the community, and he takes awesome photos, he makes great content, and he's a great dude. So give him a follow if you don't already. I imagine a lot of people who follow me on Instagram, who are subscribers to my YouTube channel, might already follow him because he's a great dude with awesome gear. Anyway, this is the Spartan Harsey Folder, and it's a knife that has been kind of in my peripheral for a long time. I've been aware that this knife exists for probably like 2 years, but I think it's actually existed for maybe even like 4 or 5 years. Anyway, it's a knife that I think has, within the last like year or so, gotten a lot more spotlight, and I've seen more and more of them, at least in like the circle of the knife community that I kind of run in or that I follow and see the content from. I see more and more people getting these and liking them. I've seen more and more videos pop up on YouTube about them, and I had handled one, or maybe a couple, because I stopped at their table at California Custom Knife Show last year, and I just handled the couple of things that were on the table, talked to the guys for a brief minute. I didn't even spend a whole day at that knife show, and I was pretty quick going through all of the different parts of it. Anyway, I remembered thinking these were pretty cool, and they seemed well made. The guys behind the brand seemed cool. The other models they had there, I think they had some fixed blades with them. I'm not sure. It's tough to remember, but I know this was the one that I was already aware of, and it was the one I wanted to handle because I had kind of like drooled over them a little bit in some people's Instagram photos before. And so the first thing I noticed about it then, and that I can reiterate now, is that this is not a small knife. I believe it's a 4-inch blade. It's a big guy, and it's, from where I stand, seems very tactical. This is essentially like a combat folder from what I can perceive. So what that does to the design, I think it makes a little bit of some sacrifices for features that I prefer in EDC knives, because it's gone further than that and it's gotten tougher than that. And so I'm interested to see by the end of, I'm going to spend about a week with this knife, and I'm not necessarily going to carry it all day, every day. It's not going to be that intense, but I'm going to have enough experiences with it to be able to review it from a place where I feel like I know what I'm talking about, and have done at least some limited cutting with it and felt how the edge does. And I'm going to be nice to this knife because it's not mine, but I'm going to feel it out a little bit, right? I'm curious to see by the end of it if the concessions this makes to be such a kind of tactical offering, whether those are too much to make it a comfortable EDC for me. So before I go any further down that rabbit hole, let's talk about the construction of this knife, and it's very well made. It's using nice materials. I won't say it's using the greatest materials because it is in CPM S35VN, which if you've watched enough of my videos, you'll know I'm not crazy about S35VN. S35VN to me is fine. I'm not going to hold it against this knife, but it isn't awarded any extra points for steel choice because I just don't love S35VN. There are people out there who do, however, so I can't necessarily knock them for using that steel. It's just not my favorite. So on the blade on this side we see USA, S35VN, Spartan blades, and on the back we have a signature. It looks like it's signed by someone named Harsey, William W. Harsey, so I'm assuming he is the designer of this knife. I'm not familiar with his work, his other designs. If he has done a lot, I'd be willing to bet I could maybe look back and be like, oh, I recognize that knife and that knife and that knife, but off the top of my head, me being honest, I'm not super familiar with William Harsey or his designs. That said, this is a strong indicator of his work. So we've got S35VN up front, we've got big thumb studs, and they're on both sides, and then we've got a titanium frame with a Reeve integral lock, aka the frame lock as everyone calls it. And it's a nice titanium frame. It's got some pretty good shape to it for my hands. The way that these finger grooves are cut actually works pretty well so far, just kind of testing out the ergos in hand. I like the shape that they've gone with here. The jimping, on the other hand, I despise because you guys probably already know I don't like aggressive jimping. I get that this is kind of a tactical knife, and so that's probably why they've gone so far as to put all of this sharp jimping all over the place. I don't like the jimping at all, but the titanium frames themselves are really well done. All of the edges, as you can see, they've been kind of like chamfered or scalloped, whatever you want to call that. They've got the edges knocked down in a nice way that looks appealing as much as it is functional. And then on the clip side, we've got the frame lock cutout. This one does not have a frame lock insert. It's just titanium. There's no hardened steel set in there. It does look to me to be a ceramic detent. And then there's no internal milling or anything funky happening other than there is an internal over travel stop. So much like Hinderer knives usually have that external disc that's kind of screwed into the frame and then hangs over to stop the arm from over traveling. This one has a disc that to me seems to be identical, whether it's literally the same design. I'm sure they're doing it differently than Hinderer is, but it's a disc nonetheless, and it's put in on the inside, so it's hidden from the outside of the knife. You can just kind of, if you look through the gap, I don't know if you'll even be able to see it, there's just, you can kind of make out that there's a disc right in there. So that looks cool to me. The clip is just a bent clip, and the way that it mounts is pretty nice. It's set into the scale. They've milled out a pocket for it, and you can see it's mirrored on this side, so if you did want to switch the clip over, it's got a plate that you then swap to this side. What I will say is not quite my favorite on the clip is the pocket that it sits in. I don't know if you can see it, there's just a little bit of like some gaps around the clip itself. If I were being real nitpicky, which I guess I kind of am by bringing it up, I'd say I think that should be the same dimension as the clip that's sitting in it, because then we wouldn't have those gaps around the edge of the clip. I just think it would look much more aesthetically pleasing if it was like more perfectly matched, those gaps weren't so big. But it's not going to ruin this knife for me, far from it. So what else do we need to talk about construction wise? We've got these big barrel spacers. They seem really large to me for barrel spacers, and they're well done. They look nice. I like the aesthetic that they bring. I think barrel spacers for this knife, already being kind of heavy, was the right choice instead of doing like a full back spacer. Those will cut down on weight a little bit. And then other than that, it's just hardware selection, right? So I really like the hardware all over this knife, frankly. I think it looks good. The pivot screw on this side is massive. It's really a big pivot screw, which is funny because on this side it's just kind of a normal size pivot screw. I assume that's because it's keeping it from getting in the way of everything that has to function over there, but It's interesting that we've got such a drastic difference in size. Again, I don't dislike that, but all the screws on here are nice. If I had to guess, I'd say these body screws are at least a T8. They might be a T10, and then the pivot's probably more like a T12 or something. They're proper, good Torx bit sized screws instead of being like little dainty T6s and stuff. Even the clip screws look like they're probably T8s or T10s as well. Anyway, so I like the material choice for the most part. In fact, I certainly do like all of it. I don't love the blade steel, but I like S35VN. I mostly throw shade on it because the fanboys behind it who bother me. It's a good steel. It's not the best steel. If you think it is, stop watching my video, unsubscribe, I don't care. I just, like, if you want to make that argument, virtually all of the data goes against you. Anyway, it's just not the best, but it's good. The titanium has worked very well. The anodizing looks great. It's got all of these, I think, kind of runic symbols on it. I feel like Matt explained to me what they were when he handed me the knife, but I have since forgotten. And there's even some engraving internally that appears to be in a different language. It's probably explaining those runic symbols. And then inside he also has cutting edge gear etched in there. It almost looks engraved more than it does etched where his cutting edge gear is. Anyway, very good finishing all over the knife. There's nothing super bothersome. If I'm being nitpicky, I don't like that there's a little gap around the pocket clip where it sets into that pocket. Other than that, I think it's pretty great. The blade itself is, it's big, and it's a pretty thick, pretty robust blade stock. I like how much they keep out to the tip. It does have what appears to be a very good piercing tip to me. I like the shape of this blade as well. I feel like aesthetically it's pleasing, and I can see it functionally doing very well. I'll confirm that with some at least light testing, but it's a good looking blade. It's not thin behind the edge, but it's not stupid thick either. This, I imagine, will be a good cutter. I don't know if Matt has sharpened this or how many times he has, but the edge it's wearing is an excellent edge. It's a very, very good edge that's on it. Super consistent. It does, there's no sharpening choil, so where the edge terminates, as it widens out, you've got a little bit of a heel there, but it's not, there's no choil, so that's not particularly avoidable unless you added a choil. Anyway, my thoughts on this knife so far are that I like a lot about it, but my worry is that when I put it in hand and I bear down on it in a saber grip, which is my most common grip for real use, I love the shape of these handle scales. Genuinely, the way that these grooves are cut work excellent for me. But I dislike pretty strongly, right off the bat, how aggressive this jimping is. That said, that's a me thing, right? I get it, and I imagine a lot of the buyers of a knife in this category, a like tactical, like combat folder, right? They probably love jimping. My issue is I like to be somewhat prepared for self-defense, right? I like to be competent enough that if I needed to use the knife that I'm carrying as a primary knife and a terrible situation were to happen and I had to defend my life with it, I'd like to be somewhat prepared to do that as much as I should be and is reasonable. But there's a line too where there are much more realistic everyday applications of what I expect of my folding knives than to use them in a super adrenaline-filled, ultra grip, like life-saving situation where I'm having to attack somebody else with a knife. Like, I just used my knives never so far for that, and a lot for everything else. So making a design that's like this aggressive in terms of the jimping, it's hot spotty. It's not like, oh, this is a nice, pleasant amount of grip. These are hot spots. This is uncomfortable for my thumb to land on. Back here, it's uncomfortable for my thumb to land on. If I push my thumb all the way up here, it's a little better, but I do also get a little bit of a hot spot right here where the lock is cut. It's just, there's some spots on this knife that are sharp. This jimping is sharp. And to me, that's not, for what I look for in a knife, it's unacceptable. I don't forgive aggressive jimping that hurts to hold on to. Because to me, I've experienced enough really good knives ergonomically that I would trust my life to in one of those situations where I have to defend my life with it without it having all of that jimping. Granted, I'm not the kind of guy who's wearing tactical gloves. I'm not a first responder. I'm not in the military. I'm not doing things like my lifestyle is one thing, right? So I don't necessarily judge people who do like jimping or find that it's necessary. But for me, it's a quick way to kind of ruin a good design by adding jimping where it shouldn't be. Even the jimping under here is it's still uncomfortable. So even in a reverse grip, I'm now kind of avoiding the worst jimping up here, but I've got jimping under my pointer finger, and if this knife had no jimping, I would be so intrigued by it. Or if it had tight, kind of well-rounded jimping that gave me a good indexing and traction point without feeling like it's trying to saw my finger off. And that sounds harsh, and I don't mean to be mean to this knife right off the bat, but I don't see it. Especially because once you take a design so far in the direction of self-defense or combat or that arena, right? I do feel like it makes some concessions to being an EDC knife. It can't possibly be as good and as comfortable to use for EDC tasks when it's that aggressive. If I had to process a bunch of cardboard right now, I'd be willing to bet within a couple of minutes my thumb would be a little bit raw, and I don't have the most dainty thumbs either. It's not like I'm a lightweight who's never using knives, and I don't work a job where I work with my hands, but I'm constantly doing projects and I'm out chopping wood just for fun, and I use my hands a fair bit, and this is it's unpleasant for me to hold on to. So if they could even just keep all of these ergos, which frankly are very locked in on their own with the shape of this handle, and alleviate some of that jimping, then all of a sudden this would make a lot of sense to me as an EDC knife. That would be great for self-defense, which is a great thing for a knife to be great at. A lot of people choose what they carry based on its abilities in that arena, but I don't think it needs this jimping to be good at that. I'm sure there are some people who disagree, and that's fair. But what I want to figure out is, with my experiences moving forward with this knife, trying to feel it out, I want to look at it objectively and try to figure out whether I can forgive that jimping and maybe find a way to place my hand around it so that it's not so annoying to me, or just figure out whether it clicks for me in a way that it hasn't yet. Because that's all that's keeping this knife from clicking for me, frankly, is the jimping that's all over it. It just makes it uncomfortable to hold. And for me, my preference, knives need to be comfortable to hold. It's a handle with a blade on it. I feel like the handle should work for my hand. That's, I don't think, a crazy thing to expect from a knife. So, we shall see. I don't mean to be mean to Spartan knives. Genuinely, I think this is a good and compelling design, and I get it. And there was even a time in my life where I was somebody who looked for jimping. Jimping I always looked at as a positive. When I wasn't as deep into knives, I was like, yeah, the more grip, the better. But I've come to discover, as my preferences have evolved, that you don't need jimping, at least in my opinion, to have good ergos that are locked into your hand and that keep the knife from slipping out. If you do put jimping, I feel like restraint is a very good thing, and you should put just enough to make it work there without crossing that line into uncomfortable. That's just me. So we'll see. Time will tell. I'm going to have, hopefully in about a week, I'll be ready to do my full review on this guy. And maybe I'll learn some more about it. Maybe I'll find that in actual use and application, turns out it works great for me. I'm open to that. In fact, I would love that, because I like the design of this knife. I like it aesthetically. I like that it's all USA made. I like that the things I've seen and heard about the company appear to be very positive, and I think it would be great for me if I could learn to love this knife. But it's just, the longer I've had it in hand, even shooting this video and just kind of gripping down on it, that jimping it might kill it for me. But we shall see. I will say, the action is way better than I expected. I'll talk a lot about that in the full review, and I'm going to keep playing with it and figuring it all out, and I think you can even front flick it. Let's see. Yeah. So it's got a lot of shining features as well, and I'm gonna get pretty in depth, I think, on my full review, just talking about all of these things. But for now, that'll be where my first impressions leave me. So I'll talk to you guys more then. Actually, I'm sure I'll talk to you a lot between now and then, because I've got a ton of videos to shoot and publish. So you'll be hearing a lot from me before the full review comes out on this one. But it is coming, and I look forward to doing it, because it's interesting and it's different for me, which makes it fun. I like to kind of push my boundaries a little bit. So there you have it, the Spartan Harsey Folder. And I guess it actually matches my shirt really well today. I didn't plan that, but when I put it here, it's like, you can't even tell I've got the... Anyway, there it is. It's a cool knife, and we'll see where I end up on it.